Hello, everybody. Welcome to the stream. Hope you're doing good. Hope you're having a good week. Settle in. We're gonna do a special thing tonight. I'm gonna record 2 episodes of The Private Citizen in one go because they are basically one's gonna come out today. Well, if I get it out in time, that is probably not, but I'm gonna fake it again and pretend it came out on Wednesday because that's kind of the promise. And then the next one's the second one that I'm recording, I'm gonna put out on Friday. They are gonna be about, the first one's gonna be about the scientific method, explaining that, a little bit of a backgrounder, and the second one is going to be about facts, the problem with facts, and those topics are kind of connected, and I could have just done them in one episode, but I think they're a bit too much for one episode, and I owe you guys an extra episode anyway, so and there's going to be more topics, so there's going to be more extra episodes in the future, I feel, but yeah, so this is kind of the setup. That's what I'm going to do tonight, as usual. Let me just post the disclaimer. Where's the button? This button? I'm recording a podcast, so I'm not going to interact with chat as much as usual, and alerts are muted, so that they don't show up in the podcast recording. This is because the audio listeners. I want to be kind to them. Of course, I'm gonna watch the chat, and as we had last episode, there might even be some discussion live on the show. Centurio, that's my disclaimer. Why is it your disclaimer? I didn't make that for you. If that would what you're implying. I just kind of this is kind of a different thing too when I'm just streaming and I'm just talking to chat a lot. So I kind of wanted to make that clear for everybody. Let me have a sip of water here. Right. Oh, I didn't do the intro. It's too late now. I didn't do my intro screen at the beginning. What the fuck? Oh, I think that was the dishwasher telling me that it's ready. That was loud. You have chatted with me a few times during brother. Well, if I do that, I think it is. I pick up stuff out of from chat. It's not that I'm not doing it. I just want to expectation management. Like one of my favorite YouTubers, Held der Steine, always says, everything's about expectation management. That's how you live a happy life. Right. Let's do this anyway. I was just saying I forgot about the intro screen, but that's the way it goes. Let's just test everything here. Let's see that we are actually recording. This is good. Oh God, this is like my mouse wheel is doing weird things. I'm gonna have to talk to Logitech about this. That works. What did Private Citizen episode? Righty-ho. That looks like it's working, but let's see that we are actually recording. This is good. Oh God, this is like
been distracting.
My mouse wheel is doing
happens, man.
Weird things.
I gotta live
I'm
with
gonna
that
have
if I
to
do
talk
this
to
live,
Logitech
right?
about
That's
this.
kind of the point.
That works. Yeah, so that seems to all be in order. I might just immediately launch into it then, just because, let's get this thing on the road, right? Let's get this podcast going. So, first one's going to be episode 63, which is going to be about the scientific method. I've got notes, which I'm also going to put in the show notes, like just as a picture, as I tend to do with these episodes. Anyway, what was I doing? I was doing this. Okay. Too many windows. Let's do this, right? Let's get this on the road. God. Why are you not playing from the beginning? Right, here we go. You're listening to The Private Citizen, episode 63 for Wednesday, the 7th of April, 2021. The Scientific Method. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Fab, coming to you live from the snowy city of Düsseldorf in Germany. we got snow again. It's April, as my grandmother tends to say. April, der macht, was will. April, it does what it wants. Would be a loose translation. Hope you're doing good. Welcome to The Private Citizen, your podcast about your rights and freedoms as a private citizen and how you can keep them. And tonight we're going to do something, or today, whatever time you're listening to this. I'm recording this live again on Twitch, so it's nighttime for me. I always do this and tend to be in the evenings because I need to do the research first and other things. We're going to do something special. I'm basically recording 2 episodes. I'm going to let you peek behind the curtain. I'm recording 2 episodes back to back. And the episode you're hearing now will be released in the usual Wednesday slot. And the second one I'm going to release on Friday. So if you're listening to this in a few days, there'll be a second episode. And I'm doing this because, first of all, I kind of owe you an extra episode, but that's not the main reason. The main reason is that these topics are kind of interlinked, and I was thinking about putting them into one episode, but it feels like it's a bit too much for one episode, and I think I'd like to have them separate. So today we're going to talk about the scientific method, something I've wanted to do for a little bit. Basically, I'm going to try to explain how the scientific method works. And then the Friday, so episode 64, the Friday episode, is going to be about the problem with facts, which is kind of interlinked. And we kind of need to explain, we need to have an understanding about science and how it works first, to then talk about the larger problem that we're having. Maybe I should start about why am I doing this. I did an episode on socialism at one point. I think this is for me is like a primer. I want to get everybody who's listening to this show like on one level, on one understanding, because I have a feeling, and it's probably less so with everybody who's listening to this show, I would guess, and more so a problem in general society right now, that everybody's talking about science, everybody's saying science all the time. And I have a feeling that a lot of people actually don't understand what that means. They don't understand how science works. And as usual, this podcast works in the following way. This is my opinion. This is what I think. What I think, basically. I'm smart. Am I smart? I can words. This is what I think, but it's not the be-all, end-all. Right, you can completely disagree, and you might, and that would be healthy. That is how this show works, because I want you to write in. If you go to privatecitizen.press, there's copious show notes. With these next 2 episodes, it's going to be a little bit. I took some handwritten notes. Those are going to be the main show notes, because this is basically based on what I kind of know. Like this first episode, it's kind of like the socialism episode, going to be about things I learned at university. And so not so many links, but please read that, and and if you disagree, or if you have if you want to chime in, please do so. And we can have a discussion on the show. There's always feedback segments in these episodes, and we can amend this, or I talked a little bit of this through with my wife, who is an actual working scientist. She does research for a living. She's a biologist, and she disagreed with some of the things I said, so I amended some stuff. But this is basically my view of it. And as we're going to talk about in that following episode about facts, there's gonna a little bit of a talk is have to be had about what facts are and what opinions are, and so in that vein, don't take this as the be all end all. All I'm saying, take this as my view, and please chime in if you are so inclined. With that out of the way, so my impetus for doing this is basically everybody is talking about science all the time, as I said, and I feel like things that word, and it's not mainly not misunderstood. I think people just can't relate to what scientists do all day, people that actually do science, and maybe they haven't learned about this in university. I'm not a scientist. I just went to university and got this explained to me. So anyway, I wanna share some knowledge, and hope that, as with the socialism episode, once you are on the same level with me, we can then further on, when we talk about things, we talk about privacy, and then that SARS-CoV-2 comes up in the pandemic, and then science comes up, and then I will go into these side meandering things, and maybe I don't have to do that anymore, because then I can just say, this refers to episode 63, where we talked about the scientific method. So I hope I hope that's good for you. This being live recorded on Twitch, you already have some feedback. I love the live feedback. Mode 7 says, always amend what you say when the wife disagrees. No, I'm just going to say in the beginning, as I said, this is my opinion. Obviously, it's colored by living with a scientist, and obviously spending a lot of time with her, and with her work, and with her friends. And my friends, those of my friends are scientists, so it's obviously colored by that. But anyway, that's enough meandering things out of the way. Let's get into this actual topic we're talking about. What is the scientific method? So when we talk about the scientific method, then that in itself is a concept, right? This is something that, as a scientist, as a I don't know if it was a profession back then, but this whole understanding of being a scientist and having a method that is usually recognized basically started in the Renaissance. And it started because there was people who were scientists back then had to differentiate themselves from pseudoscientists, what they call pseudoscience, charlatans basically, and they wanted to do that, and they wanted to talk about how scientists work, and this is where this scientific method originated, and the term, I think the term is like a more of a 20th century thing, but the idea goes back to the Renaissance, and obviously it goes farther back, and I'm going to get into that in a second. Now, I went to university. I never finished university. I do not have a degree. I studied politics, history, and English, linguistics. So obviously my understanding is colored, and as a student of the humanities, you generally do not really get like a primer in a scientific method. That would be something I would think you'd get if you study biology or chemistry or physics, or to some degree math. But I was very lucky. In my very first semester, I had a very good professor in history, a very respected, well-known old professor who was actually way beyond like the normal teaching. And he was just keep doing it because he liked it. And so basically the first thing he did when we ever had the first lecture was basically explaining the scientific method to us, because as I will go into later, it applies to history. It's just not often thought of it that way, and it of course has to be modified. So what I'm talking here in general terms is something that is a natural sciences thing. So the general idea is thought to go back to Aristotle, ancient Greece. So we're mostly talking, I mean, those people back then, they were all kind of philosophers, but we're both mostly talking about, physics. This is a thing that's mostly based in like physics and chemistry. Later got adapted to, when biology came along, which is actually, I think, the youngest natural science pretty much. If you don't count like, computer science or anything like that, which to me is basically math. But when that came along, that was obviously very important, and it's important in medicine today, of course. And so the general idea is thought to be based on Aristotle. Then there's a guy called Ibn al-Haytham. Haytha. I don't even. I'm a bit. I should probably Google this. It probably tells me how he's pronounced. Al-Hazen, I guess. Ibn al-Hazen, who he is by many, together with Aristotle, believed or thought to be as of the originator of this, of the method. He lived around the year 1000 and did a lot of work in optics. And then, of course, a very other important person who's always thought of when you talk about the scientific method is Galileo Galilei, who lived by and died by, so to speak, the scientific method. And of course, there's the Newton thing with the apple, and I've never really been a fan of that. But basically, what we're talking about here, the general idea is empiricism. So, developing a method by which you have a hypothesis, then you do experiments, and you prove or disprove the hypothesis. So an instrument to understand the world around you by observation. I think that's as much as I can boil it down. And the whole thing starts with the hypothesis. And this is where this is based on observation generally, but generally it's just an idea. It's just you having an idea about how the world works, right? And you can take many examples, from the black hole to how molecules, what molecules look like, what the DNA looks like, anything like that. How gravity works. You have a hypothesis. You think for some reason that something is a certain way. That's your hypothesis, and then you try to formulate that most clearly, in the simplest way that you can. And the next step would then be to go about proving this hypothesis. Generally, we do that with experiments, with that. In humanities, if you're doing history or something, you can't really do experiments, right? If you do, like, you have a hypothesis, I don't know, Hitler lost the Second World War because, or the tank battle at Kursk went in the following way. And then you can't really do experiments. In humanities, you usually substitute that with research. It's obviously also the same thing in the natural sciences. I mean, research kind of permeates this whole thing, right? So you have a hypothesis in modern, if you do research these days, the first thing you'll do is you'll look it up. You go on the internet, you do a search, if you're a biologist or medical student, you go to PubMed and you look for other people and what they've done in this field. Because basically, if you come up with a hypothesis and somebody already had it and proved it, you're like, you don't want to, duplicate that work. You don't want to reinvent the wheel. So research is everywhere. But generally in humanities and politics, in history, you would, instead of experiments, you would do research. You would go to an archive and you try to find primary sources. If if you're researching the tank battle at Kursk, you would try to find reconnaissance pictures by the Wehrmacht, for example, and then look at our reports, from the Red Army and from the Wehrmacht, and you would read them, and you would of course also see what other people have researched and stuff like that. Now experiments, generally, I mean, we can go a little bit into how these are conducted. The general idea is, and this is something, when I talked about this with my wife, she stressed so that the important ideas, you have the important thing here is you have a hypothesis, and that is of course inherently biased, right? It's based on your ideas. It's like you observed something and you're going, I think it means that, right? So you drop an apple, it falls down, and then you'd be like, okay, what is gravity? And it's not magnetism, so it's like space is curved or something. You have an idea, like the weight of the planet curves the space-time continuum, that's why the apple drops, or whatever. I'm not really good at physics. So there won't be many physics examples in this. But, something like that. And that is inherently biased. That's based on your experiences. Now, the important thing is, now if you're doing experiments, it's very important to get yourself into a mindset as a scientist where you're as neutral as you can. We talked a lot about on this show how you can never be really neutral, but, you're trying to be as open as you can. Because the whole idea with the experiment is you have to be open. Science always ends in disaster if you just want to prove your hypothesis, right? Because then you can run an experiment and you collect data from that, and you might, because you're so blinded by what you think is true, you can evaluate that data incorrectly, or you can miss things. So you have to try to be completely open-minded, where you're like, I'm trying to prove this hypothesis, but you have to be prepared that the experiments are actually showing you the exact opposite of what you basically want to come out. And this happens a lot. Especially, my wife is a very good example. I mean, everybody who does she does background background research kind of things. And if you do that kind of stuff and you're like, okay, so I have this protein and we have no idea what it does in the human body, and I'm trying to find out, right? So I'm taking mice, and what I'm doing is actually, I know that gene makes this protein, right? And I'm doing something called a knockout mouse. It's a very common technique in this field. So you're breeding mice selectively, or you're genetically manipulating them in a way where you actually destroy that gene, like you knock it out. You make descendant of these mice you're breeding that don't have that gene, with the goal of figuring out what happens to the organism if that gene isn't there, which can't code that protein, so the mice don't make that protein in their bodies. So you want to figure out, then you watch them, and then if your theory is that they can't live without this protein because their liver fails or whatever, then you watch them and see if they die because of liver failure. And you got to be prepared for this to be something completely different. Like you knock out that protein and suddenly the mice is living twice as long. You thought they would die, they're living twice as long. And that happens in science all the time. And that's the point where you either scrap the paper you're writing, or you're changing it to the complete opposite. Like your working hypothesis was this protein makes mice live longer, and what actually ends up being your paper is this protein makes mice live twice as long. This is very simplified, of course, but so you have to be prepared for this to happen at all times, and to for you to go, oh, it's back to the drawing board. My hypothesis was obviously wrong. My experiments are showing something completely different. And then you do it over again. This is why not many people can be scientists. Being a scientist and doing this actual work. I mean, there's lots of people, that's something we can maybe talk about as well. There's lots of people who are called scientists, who call themselves scientists, who are in society seen as being scientists. But what I'm talking about here right now is like the people who do actually the backbone of research, right? The physicists, the biologists, the chemists, the mathematicians who actually think about things, historians, stuff like that. And that's a very demanding job, because you will do a lot of work and then you figure out, shit, my hypothesis was wrong. How I'm going to salvage this, what I'm going to do. And sometimes you have to throw like years of work away. And sometimes your experiments don't work, which is another problem. But the important thing with the experiments being like, be open-minded, right? You're just running the experiment, you're observing the result. And then, of course, you need to build in, there's, certain mechanisms you can build in, if you do, there's this thing called double-blind studies. Basically, in medical science, if you're trying to figure out what a certain drug does to people, of course, you have two groups. You have people who get the drug, and you have people who get a placebo, so basically a pill that does nothing. You don't tell them. You don't tell anybody. Like only the guys running the experiments know who's actually getting the drug and who isn't. And then at the end, that helps you prove that the drug works or doesn't work or whatever. And you do that with all kinds of stuff. Like if you're doing a mouse line and you're knocking out that one gene, you can't just go, well, it's gone. You have to actually prove that, right? The first step is to actually prove that the mouse doesn't have that gene and can't make that protein, and then the next step is to actually figure out what happens. So what they, for example, do is a very common technique is you do not like delete that gene in the mouse's DNA. You replace it with something else, and something they do is there's like a GFP, green fluorescent protein. It's basically a gene from a jellyfish that makes the cells glow green under ultraviolet light, right? And if you're doing something where basically you're changing a gene that is pretty much in every cell, and you're taking that one protein out, you put GFP in. If your mice glow green under UV light, their cells glow green. Hey, I actually succeeded in knocking out that one. Well, you don't really know that it's that gene. I mean, that's also, you do other things, you sequence them or whatever. But, you have all these like layers of being careful. Basically, you're running an experiment, and, the end goal is to publish this, and you're publishing this so that other scientists can see what you're doing, right? And the idea is always, when you're publishing scientific documents, scientific papers, that another scientist in the field can basically redo your research. So in biology or in chemistry, that means if you do an experiment, the paper has to be so specific that somebody in another country knows exactly what lab equipment they need, how they have to set it up, and how to run the experiments, and they get the same results. If you're doing history, right, you have to, like, if I say, well, Bismarck was actually not a fan, like Bismarck was against Germany having colonies, and then I have to prove that, right? So I read Bismarck's letters, his published works. I read his letters, and I find like lots of places where he actually says that in confidence to people, and then I quote him like in my paper. But then as a historian, I have to like list my sources so that somebody else in the field can go. And if it's like, sometimes it'll be like primary sources, so there only be like, I'm doing like, I don't know, research on Stalin or whatever. So the primary sources will be like in an archive somewhere in Moscow. So I have to actually tell the people exactly where that is, so they can go to Moscow, and then find that, and see that what I'm basing my argument on. And it's that, and to do that, you need to like that's one step, right? You need to like document everything you're doing, but you also need to like all these layers of like, this is my hypothesis, but then I'm doing these experiments to prove it, but then I need all these layers to show that these experiments are actually showing what I want them to show. Right? And of course, you run experiments, and then you get results, and you analyze the data. Sometimes that need to do more research there. But basically, that is now when you test your hypothesis. You're like, okay, so my idea was this. I ran these experiments. I got this data. This seems to prove my hypothesis because, and then you're building an argument. And the end goal, of course, is publishing your results. But the step before that is peer review. And this, I mean, these days that's part of the publishing process, but it didn't used to, like, back in the day, when we're talking like Renaissance or whatever, and Francis Bacon or whoever, you'd be like, you'd write down your theory, your experiments, whatever, and then you'd send that to the people you knew. There were like 5 people of you interested in this, and you were in England, some guy was in France, some guy in Germany, and you circulated like your letters, and you sent letters back and forth. And that's peer review. Your peers, the people in your field that have similar knowledge, are then invited to look at your results and, have an opinion and see if they agree. Because, I mean, this is what's guarding against that initial thing where I said it's very important to be neutral. And nobody can be neutral. Everybody's biased in some way. Even if you're doing this whole scientific method with good intentions and as best as you can still be biased. Because, you had certain experiences, this is how you think the world works, and you're just not seeing a certain thing. And that's what peer review is for. Because then your colleague from another university or another country or whatever goes, well, see, there's a hole in your argument there, because this is your theory and these are your experiments, but actually you didn't conclusively prove this, because this could have happened and you never did an experiment there. And then you would go back and you would do that experiment, maybe, right? Or sometimes somebody modifies your experiments or things like that. And it's that again is a very, very, very strenuous process. There's all these memes. If you know somebody who's like science Twitter, like the Twitter bubble from the science, there's like all these memes, review too, right? Because today, in today's thing, like you had an idea, you had a hypothesis, you made experiments, and you're publishing your paper, and you do that in the journal, right? And the way the peer review process these days works is you submit your work to a journal, and they submit that to your peers, but they don't tell you who it is, and because researchers all know each other, right? So the field my wife works in, she does like research on the autonomous nervous system of the heart. I mean, there's like literally, she was at a conference in San Diego where I think everybody who researches, who's a researcher in this field was there, right? There were like, I don't know, 400, 600 people. I don't know. I mean, obviously there were other people there. It wasn't just a conference about that. But like, at some point you actually know, like, in the specific people that are actually researching that specific thing that you're researching, it might just be 2 research groups, like your research group and then one in Japan and one in the US, and that's it. Like, there's like 8 people researching this, and you know them. So they don't want to tell you. So it's like a review or 2. And then at some point, you even, like, if you're publishing a lot of papers, you get to know, like, oh, this writing style, I actually know who that is. And this guy's always bitching, like, reviewer 2 is always bitching. So there's all these memes about it. But, like, the general idea where this is obviously, of course, happening is you want competition. And I'm gonna get back to this point in the end a little bit, because science tends to go awry when you do not have this competition of ideas, right? The idea is that lots of people have different hypotheses and you're kind of battling. There's this famous thing with Kip Thorne and Stephen Hawking about the black holes and about the bat and all this kind. You have a friendly competition going. Like everybody wants to be right, and that's where you get biased. But you have your peers who are supposed to keep you on your toes, right? Who are supposed to know as much as you do about the topic and keep you on your toes. And then you do that to them when they publish something. So, what comes around goes around. And at the end, you're publishing your results. And that that is the scientific method. It's not magic. It is a system that is it's like craft, right? Sometimes you read things where people are going on about the art of science. And I always cringe when I read that because science is a craft. It's much like journalism, actually. Well, it's harder than journalism, let's be honest. But it's a craft. It's this is a system that's been established over hundreds of years of how to do this. Exactly how we people who build roofs on houses. They have certain ways of doing things because they just realized that's just the best way to. I mean, people do things differently, but generally there's a general consensus on how you do things, and that is what the scientific method is. You look at the world, you develop a hypothesis, you conduct experiments that will prove or disprove what your hypothesis is. You do research. You look at your results from your experiments, and you compare them against your hypothesis, and then you redo that. If they don't prove your hypothesis, you start over. You modify your hypothesis. The important thing is to be sure that your experiments were valid, right? But if you're sure that your experiments were valid, that's the most important thing. If they then tell you your hypothesis was wrong and needs to be amended, then that's okay as long as you have faith in your experiments. I mean, it's okay is a relative term, right? It might pain you because it means a lot more work. But then when you're happy with your hypothesis and you think you have results that confirm this, you show these to your peers, they review it, and then you publish your results so that other scientists may test them, may, if they disagree, maybe disprove. I mean, the fact that that's a very important thing, actually. The fact that you publish something and it came out of peer review does not mean it's a fact or true. Hopefully, if everything works correctly, yes, that will have proved your hypothesis. But that doesn't mean that somebody doesn't come along later with a better hypothesis. Right? Or that somebody comes along and says, actually, what you did there looked like it proved your hypothesis, but actually it didn't. Often this is like a leap in technology enables these kind of things, right? So in chemistry and physics and biology, there were all these hypotheses, and then because they had like microscopes, and then somebody invented the electron microscope, and then you could look a lot deeper into things, and it was like, okay, we need to modify a lot of these things, and that doesn't mean the first people failed. That is just how science works, and that is, I think, the most important thing to understand is, and I'm going to talk about that a lot more in the episode on Friday and the upcoming episode, but science is, if I was gonna surmise it, I would say science is more a collection of working hypotheses than it is a body of fact. Science the system doesn't work in a way where you go, okay, this is now proven, let's move on. right? We will assume that is true for all time. That's not how it works. People will look at aspects of it and they might be wrong. New technology will show you different things, and you will build on things. And often you just do not get to a point where you can actually tell if something is categorically true. And this is why if you listen to scientists talk, and if you listen to lectures from scientists and talking among themselves, they do not talk about like, okay, this is a fact, this is a fact, this is a fact. They talk about hypotheses, and some of them might be very stable, right? And might have been correct for a very long time. But for example, you might have learned in school what the DNA looks like, the famous DNA model by Watson and Crick, the double helix, right? We are relatively sure that is what the DNA looks like. We can't prove it. Like, we do not have the technology to actually go. We can now kind of see things that make us think like, wow, that was actually like, I don't know when it was developed, like 50 years ago. They had no way to actually see molecules of that size, right? So they were like incredibly amazing to figure out that that's actually what it looks like, and we kind of think that it looks like, but we can't prove it. Or if you're talking physics, right? You have a theory of how an atom works, right? You have a nucleus, and you have all these, electrons flying around, but we don't really know that that's what it looks like. We can't observe it. We can hardly can't really observe we can't even the model we have of molecules sticking together. But it's a very good working model because we can use it to, split the atom in air quotes. We can build a nuclear power plant. We can build a nuclear bomb. So the model is good enough to enable us to actually do a lot with it, but that doesn't mean it is completely correct. And that doesn't mean tomorrow somebody's going to invent this amazing quantum hyper microscope, and then we can actually look at an atom and then we're like, oh, it actually looks different. Another thing is actually, Mode 7 makes a very good point in Twitch that science is always looking to be proven wrong. Exactly. If you have a scientific mindset, that's what you think. And you should actually be happy to be proven wrong. I mean, nobody's happy. It's like destroying your work, whatever. But as a scientist, your goal is to get as close to, with what you're describing, as close to reality if you can. And if somebody comes along and says, well, your work actually was wrong, this is better, this is my model and it's better, and then if you see it is better, then you should be happy. Even though the guy kind of bombarded your work, but or gal, in many cases gals, but your goal as a group of scientists is to get closer to the truth. That is the goal. I mean, the end goal is reaching the truth, but that's I don't know if you can ever do that. But it's amazing how many things where in public culture we think, hey, that's proven, we know how that works. We don't really know. So I was doing ham radio course last year, and I was actually amazed because I don't know anything about electronics. I'm shit at hardware and stuff like that. Of course, you do a lot of electronic stuff there. And we had an electrician, of course, but also a teacher who teaches physics. Used to teach physics actually at a technical university. And it's amazing how many models there are for how electrical power works. Right? There's all these, so basically it's you have a piece of copper, for example, and then the models of how actually electricity is conducted through that, with how the electrons move and then confer power. There's several different models, and depending on what you're doing, if you're just wiring shit or if you're actually a physicist, you use different aspects of that. It's kind of like with the with light being, light famously a particle and a wave. I mean, it can't be both. That's not how it works. Like that's the easiest thing. Like what, like if science worked like this, where you're like, okay, this is a fact. Like what's the fact? Is it a wave or is it a particle? It's actually probably neither, maybe both. We don't probably waves and particles are just approximations of what actually happens in nature, and we haven't gotten closer. So with some things, when you're trying to figure out some things, you actually need to think it's a wave. It works better if you're like, I don't know, calculating some shit. It's better if you treat it as a wave, and then with other questions, it's better than you treat with a particle. Or like the hadron, the thing that actually is only there if you do not. It's not there if you observe it or something like that. I mean, if you go like really into like particle physics, or like Hawking's like space bullshit physics, right? It's like it gets almost it becomes almost a philosophy. It's almost like philosophers talking about stuff. It's not so much about, oh, this is a fact or that's a fact. It's like they're clearly just talking about models, and which model has more merit because it can explain something, and then it explains something else. And like that's not derogatory. When you talk to normal people in air quotes about these things, they often think like models. That sounds like, well, it's really shit, but it's not. Because like these models can be incredibly accurate. If you look at like black holes, for example, right? How basically Einstein just came up with that idea, and we've basically now proven it. Like I don't think we can directly observe black holes, but we're pretty sure they exist. So that model was a pretty good model. Like, and you have that a lot in science, but that doesn't mean it doesn't get amended. Right? That doesn't mean once we actually build a spaceship and can go to a black hole, we actually figure out, hey, things are actually quite a little bit different, or maybe a lot different than we actually thought. Yeah, and as Hari Vartana points out, many times new theories stand on the shoulders of giants. Yeah, it's often not that it's like, oh, this is completely wrong. I mean, that happens as well. Like evolution is a famous example. There was this guy before Darwin, with the basically... the giraffe's neck gets longer because like it stretches its neck, and then its descendants have a little bit longer neck or something. I've forgotten how that works. We did that in like biology in high school. Sometimes things are just wrong, but often it's just you're just a little bit off. And then the next guy comes along, it's like, okay, we'll improve this a little bit. But the thing is that Hari talks about here, this is very important. The next guy can only do that because you did the work before, right? They stand on the shoulders of giants. You had your hypothesis was first. You ran experiments that they could build on. And so science is that's why it's also not for everybody. It's a very selfless task, really. Because often also you don't get the merit. Sometimes somebody gets the merit, but even these days, often it's like, it's the guy who runs the department in the university, right? The head of the department, not the guys who did years of the work, who are actually in the lab the whole time. And maybe somebody else actually came up with the idea, and their name just gets attached to it or something. So it's a very, very selfless thing. So you're paid very badly. So I have a lot of respect for scientists, and especially good scientists who have this mindset, who have this way, this way of thinking. That the way of being able to. It needs so many different aspects, and some scientists are better on some than on others. So often these days you have like separation of work, right? You have some people who are really good to come up with hypotheses. That's like their thing, and they're often like termed the geniuses, right? The guy who's just like out of left field, it's like maybe it's like this, and then it actually turns out to be like that. But like another very important thing that's often lauded a lot less is like just having this mindset of being able to be neutral, to run experiments, and you're like, okay, we're all thinking it's this because my colleague came out with it. We all think it's this. and then you run an experiment, and you're so able to divorce yourself from this expectation that you go like, look at this data, it's telling us the exact opposite. It's like, this is telling us the exact opposite. And the bad scientists would go and try to bend, like, not because they're corrupt or anything, it's just like a human impulse. You want to be right. Like, you don't want to redo all your work. But the really good guys are like, look at the, look, it's showing us something complete, and it's actually like that. And then you have to redo everything. So yeah, that is basically the scientific method. Now I have some things. You probably have to go to privatecitizen.press and look in the show notes. So I try to made a little spectrum, because I think the way this all works varies a little bit, but what kind of science you're doing. People these days, they say science. But scientists and fields are very different. And people, when they say science, they often think of what these days is often called STEM, what back in my day we just used to call natural sciences. So that's biology, chemistry, physics, math. And they don't really think of history and politics and linguistics as science, but that's also science, right? Figuring out what languages are related and how words, like, what is a word? What's a meme? What's a phoneme? What's a sentence? What's a phrasal verb? How do words change meaning? How do they get meaning? Do they change meaning? Can you change their meaning? What kind of different forces are at work there? Politics. How are decisions made? Like, what are the patterns in politics? What is the theory behind things like democracy? And history is also, it's also a science. So I have a kind of like, this is very personal. This is how I think, and people, especially in these fields, might actually disagree. And this is, of course, not all sciences. It's just the ones I can think of off the top of my head. But I have kind of like biology and chemistry in the middle. So biology and chemistry, to me, are the most fact-based, if you can talk fact in air quotes, fact-based sciences, right? These are very low to the ground sciences generally. Biology is about figuring out how organisms work, and actually overlaps a lot with chemistry. So that's why there's organic and inorganic chemistry. Like, chemistry is about figuring out like the substances and how they behave, right? How everything we have on the planet, how it like how molecules react and shit like that. And these are almost purely observation based. What you're doing is you're looking at things you can observe, and you're trying to explain it. Now, physics in some ways is close to that, but physics goes into a direction that is almost like idea based, or like it's almost already beginning to be philosophy, because there's lots of things you can observe, but then there's also other stuff when you when you get into very advanced like physics, how space works, how time works. You're often talking about things that you cannot observe. Relativity, the theory of general relativity, is like lots of that stuff is like not observable, or wasn't observable at the time that it was developed. And it goes off, it comes to a point in math. So math, to me, of course, math is also kind of based on observable things, but math is a pure system, right? Math is a way of describing the world and categorizing and organizing the world. It's not, I kind of want to say it's completely arbitrary, but it's not, because of course it's based on the reality of the world. But it is, you can tell by like how many systems, you can count in binary, or you can count in what's actually this. I don't even know what that's called. The system we use based on 10. Anyway, you can. It's like an idea. Like if you, I mean, I'm shit at math, and this is where it gets bad. And with somebody who's good at math is probably going to correct me. But things like when you do math, and then they talk about like the number 0, right? The zero is an idea. That's almost like philosophy, right? It's the idea of nothing. What is that? And like what in like the quantum leap it enabled in math and in calculating things if you actually have a zero. There's like this stuff, civilizations suddenly be like architecture and things like that. Things they were able to do because they invented the concept of zero and then could calculate with zero. Oh yeah, centurial purposes, of course, right? Decimal system, Deci for 10, exactly. Math was always my worst subject. I am shit at math. But, math is, it's a system that is based in reality and that is very, very applicable in reality, right? I mean, you can't have a complex building and calculate like load on things and statics and stuff like that without math, right? You can't put a plane in the sky without math. So it's not like arbitrary, but it is a system. It's a system of thinking. Whereas biology is not. You're not like going, I wonder how fish breathe underwater. It could be possible that they have this organ that works like this. No, you take a fish, you cut it open, you look, okay, it doesn't have a lung, right? So where the mouth is here, and you're like, oh, those things, I'm going to call them gills, those must be how they breathe underwater. And then you like cut a fish half open, put them in water while they're living or whatever they did to figure out how gills work. But like that's completely based on observation. Whereas math, if you get into things like, it is to a certain point, if you're like adding stuff and dividing stuff, of course. But like if you get into, I don't know, complex algebra, it like leaves that realm and it starts almost to be philosophy. Another example to me would be computer science, right? Which is a lot of it is math, but like if you're getting into like programming languages and all that, it's like it's a made up system. Right? We built the electronics and we developed the logic. Like we invented that. That wasn't in nature before. Like we invented that, and we invented a system that uses natural laws, but like transcends that and can kind of, do stuff on top of that. Like we do all these things, like me recording this podcast, based on like tiny circuits that just go on off at all times, right? And then of course we change that when we go like, oh, quantum computing, we can actually have more than two states, and I have no idea how that works. But like, I'm not saying it's, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying it's not science and it's not fact based, but it's like from the pure observational fact basis more into the idea basis. And I actually have a spectrum to the other side, which is where I think most of the humanities are, things that I've studied, politics, linguistics, history. First politics, linguistics, and then history. That's towards like the emotion base, right? So politics is closer to fact because it's just closer to like, if you study politics, if you study history and politics, history is everything generally, it's considered everything up until 30 years in the past. And the time between now and the last 30 years is politics. And that's usually because that used to be the time until archives were opened and things were declassified. So after you have that declassified stuff, you can go and study history. In the realm of politics, you're more tied to observing. So, for example, if you study Bismarck as a historian, he was a politician, right? You would have studied him as a political scientist in his day. But as a historian, he's dead. His archive has been opened. His private letters are in books that I actually have in the other room, that you can read. As a politics student, you don't have that, right? At the time, you can only observe what he does. You can read his public speeches. You can listen to them. So your sources are very different. They're more directly observing the things, and that's that's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because you have people that are there. You are there yourself. It's a curse because you don't have certain sources. You can't look into their heads. You can't look into the papers of governments. As a historian, like 100 years later, you can look into the papers, but you're running out of people who are actually there, right? If you're now researching the outbreak of the Second World War, like pretty much anybody's dead, right? My grandma was around. She's 99 now. She's like one of the last. That's why I visit her every week and talk to her, because that's like a living piece of history, and very precious. Besides being my grandma and being the most amazing person I know, right. So that's the difference there, right? So politics is generally more based on observation. Same about like linguistics. I would put that in that same bracket. Whereas history is a lot more, like, I call it emotion based. It's a lot more. It's like biology, chemistry are in the middle, physics, politics outwards, and then math and history are at two different ends. But they're basically meeting around. It's philosophy again, right? A lot of history is philosophy. So history is it's a lot less based on fact that people think. People think, oh, it's in history books, it must be true. No, like, that's why the saying exists, history is written by the victors. That is what it is. So if you're researching Nazi Germany, the truth about the Nazis is not what you read in a history book. That might be relatively close, but there are a lot of things that never made it into the history book. Like, history is like looking at society, right? You have different viewpoints, and there's not a fact there is a fact at the bottom of it, but even if you were there and you looked at it, you were biased. Nobody can just observe a fact and it being a fact. Well, we're going to talk about that in the next episode. But there's lots of viewpoints from people that were part of it back then that never made it into history books because, I don't know, there were Nazis, they were in the Wehrmacht, they were on the other side. So, right, I'm not saying reality is what the Nazis would have said it was, but it's somewhere between what's in the history books, which is largely influenced by the Allies, and the things between what they would have said happened. An interesting thing is, like, one of my favorite examples is the tank battle of Kursk, which was always had a certain view in history. Historians were like, okay, this is probably how it happened, and that was based a lot on propaganda from the Soviet Red Army, and it was kind of hard to look at the other side because the papers that the Wehrmacht had, that the Nazis had, like reconnaissance forts and stuff, that was seized. A lot of it was burnt, but a lot of it ended up in the Soviet archives. And only after those got open, after the wall fell, and years later, we now actually have there's a very interesting paper that was published it was 2 years ago or something, about like how it, what actually looks like it didn't happen as we thought. So history is the same way. There's always like, it tends to go in waves. It tends to be like people closer to the event see something in a certain way, and then people farther away have a different view. Also, it's always influenced with history and politics. You gotta always remember it's always influenced by the politics of the day, right? So people who researched Hitler 30 years ago, 40 years ago, or Stalin will have looked at that differently than people who research it today. It's just because of their political situation, and their feelings towards their parents, who might have been, there might have been descendants of people who were actually involved in the conflict. So that's what I mean with like emotion based. Another way of looking at it is that like biology, chemistry, science, a set of lies we all agree upon, says Harry Vatana. That's from Dan Carlin. Yeah, well, I wouldn't say it's... that's a bit tough. Like, that's a bit too strong, I would say, because lie always, that's like, the problem I always had with Trump, like saying a lie implies that somebody's doing it on purpose, and like some of that is not on purpose. Like, it's hard to do. So we had like one of the first, this very same history professor that taught me what the scientific method is, and also taught me about statistics and stuff, did this very interesting thing where they did experiments. I think this was like in the 60s or 70s, where they asked and video recorded witnesses of history of so I did a lot of stuff about the Third Reich. That was kind of my Bismarck and Third Reich were my two topics that I had most of my work on in university. And so they were talking to people who had Germans who had witnessed the Third Reich, and then so our history professor showed us these videos of where they did interviews like over days, right, with people. And there was this old lady, and they asked her about the Olympics, the Summer Olympics in Germany. Was it 36? The Hitler Nazi organized Summer Olympics in Germany. And they asked her, like, how did you feel? Like, what, you were there, you lived in Berlin, what does it look like? And she was like, it was amazing. It was like everything was decked out in flowers. They had all these flags and banners, and it was glorious. We felt like the future was opening, and Germany was finally coming back from like the misery of the depression. And we felt so eclectic. We were so happy, and we were so full of hope. And the Olympics were in Germany. It was like this sign. It was amazing, right? And then immediately afterwards, he showed us another video of the same lady being interviewed, like days later. They covered lots of topics in between. And basically they're leading over, they had asked her what she'd known about the Holocaust and stuff like that. And so the interviewer asked her, like, when you were at the Summer Olympics, and what did you, like, how did that seem like in relation to that? Like, how did, like, all the flags and all the statues and everything, like, she had said something before that, there were dark rumors and they didn't really know what was going on, but she knew that, some of her neighbors were Jews and they were like deported, and they had a bad feeling anyway. That was like the lead up to it. And then she was like, it was horrible. There was like, the Nazis were everywhere. There were people everywhere in like jack boots and uniforms, and they had all these red flags in every street. And it was so depressing. We were living under the yoke of Nazi rule, and we just realized how bad it was. And it's the same person being asked about the same event, like a few days apart, just by context, remembering this very same event extremely differently. And that, like, opened my, like, he showed us that to show, like, never trust an eyewitness, right? Eyewitnesses in history, in historical science, can be incredibly helpful, but you've always got to, like, you got to imagine, like, people remembering things that are 50 years ago. Like, it's all colored by emotion that, like, is divorced from the moment. It's just how our brain works. And I had, like, this moment, like, years later, actually, when I was working as a journalist, and I talked to a criminal investigator who has been interested in how, detectives and how crimes are solved and whatever. And he was talking about, like, the same thing, like witnesses of a crime, right? And he said, like, just basically, pretty much anybody has been in a car, has seen a car accident or anything. Like, just remember, like, that moment. And, there's a car accident, like, in a crossroads, like, 2 cars hit each other, and then the police comes and they're asking bystanders what happened. And they're like, this car was, like, too fast, it came around the corner totally suddenly, and the other car couldn't see him, and then they crashed. And then the next guy is like, no, that car was going completely slow, like, the other guy's at fault. And he was like, this is so much worse when you like, actually, I think this was like I don't know, I think I was interviewing because of something else or something, but I was like this was like a thing for like investigators. They were basically talking about a case where somebody shot somebody in Germany in a like an ice cream in front of an ice cream shop. So it was basically ice cream shop in summer. Everybody's sitting outside. Hard to remember these days. Like on the things, and like two men both get up out of their chairs, start shouting at each other, back away like a meter from, back away a little bit. One of them pulls a pistol, shoots the other guy in the head, looks around, walks away. And they were like, he was like showing like these things from the interrogation, like the file, right? And it was like all this, like, he was like tall, he had a beard, and the other guy, no, he looked like a Muslim. No, that was best. And the other guy was like, no, it was a white guy. It was like, they had no idea who they were looking for. There was a guy who shot another guy in front of like 250 witnesses, and they had no idea who they were looking for. They had no true description that matched each other, like down to the clothes, the color of the clothes, to like what the guy, like the only thing they knew was the male. They knew two males were involved, but they had no idea how old he was. Could have been anywhere between like 25 and 60. White, Arabic, probably, I don't know, black, maybe. Nah, it's unlikely in Germany, but you know, Asian. It's like, this is how the brain works. Like the human brain is not built for this kind. Like I'm going to talk about that like next episode. But like, you know, it's not. The human brain is not made to remember facts. Basically, it's made to remember emotions mostly. I listened to a podcast once where they were talking about why that is. It's like a neuroscience podcast. They were like, you know, back in the day, there's like this theory where people think, you know, basically back when our brain was formed the way it is, when we were living in the steppes, right? It was really important to know which berries you couldn't eat, and you could remember the guy eating it, puking and dying, or you could vividly remember the emotion you had, like in the cave where the lions were, where you're not supposed to go. Like, it doesn't matter really what the lion looked like, right? I mean, if it's green, blue, yellow, who cares? It's like the emotion is the thing that your brain remembers. And then there's also like this, actually another podcast I listen to by the guy who makes Magic: The Gathering, this the card game. He actually studied, I think, communication, and he had this whole thing about how your brain basically saves the information and where you got it from in two different parts, and it only, like, funnily enough, the information gets saved longer. So this explains like this is a very, very big problem, for example, with television, where you can see something like a fact or like something is portrayed to you, and like you can remember vividly what that was, but like a year later you have no idea if that was a documentary or if it was like on a drama show, or if it was like, you don't know. So this is like, often people remember like facts, like they remember the facts, but they don't remember the source, which is a huge problem, especially these days, right? You don't connect the reliability of the source. I mean, you can do that and you can remember that, but inherently, apparently, our brains are built in a way where that is often not happening, and obviously that would impinge science also a lot. But yeah, I'm getting into the weeds here. But basically the idea I'm trying to convey here is how like science is like wide, like, and that is all these different focuses. So this emotion fact idea thing that I have, like with biology and history and math, right? Biology being like fact, history being emotion, math being idea. It's like, that's very, very, very crass, you know. It's just to to state what I'm thinking about. But like another idea would be you could put it on a scale where like biology, chemistry is like mostly empirical and observational based. I mean, all science is supposed to be empirical, but it's mostly be cataloging, about cataloging what actually is in nature. Like, how do your organs work? That's lead, and that's iron. And then if you get to physics and math or history and politics, it's more like about theories and laws. In physics, it's the laws of physics, but they are laws. They're not, right? The laws of physics don't mean, like, they're not, if you get in the weeds, they're not allowed. Okay, yeah, gravity is about observable, right? But they're often not about observable things. But they're about like these concepts that we've developed that are universal, right? The speed of light being a constant. Like, you can't observe that, right? The speed of sound, you can run you can run experiments for the speed of light as well, but with your human eyes, you can't observe that. That's not the idea. The idea is to explain, not to look at something and dissect it and catalog it. It's about like explaining why things you observe are the way they are, right? Why can the plane fly? Like, why can we make the plane fly? And history is kind of like the same thing. It's not so much about directly observing what's happened, because you can't, because it was 1,000 years ago. It's really more about cataloging the patterns that happen in society. Both politics and history is mostly about patterns. It's also about laws. It's kind of like the laws of history, basically. Certain things lead to other things, right? Power, the way power works. How do states work? How do they get maintained? When do they collapse? Things like that. That's where people say history is repeating itself. That's kind of that thing. That would be like saying laws of physics are repeating themselves. Basically, I think that's to make it easy. And like history and math, those two directions are more about like they're more in the idealism direction than the realism, which is more like biology. It's a lot more about observing things, whereas history much more goes into like building it's about understanding what happened to the degree that you can, but then it's also about like building like an idea of how these things work. And math and physics are the same. But all of these different fields and topics have the scientific method in common. Like that's universal. That is the basic, that is what science is. No matter what you're doing, to me, it's only science if you're basing it on the scientific on the scientific method. And that is also not as strict as it sounds, right? That's just a label you slap on things. But that, to me, it's a way of thinking. And that differentiates itself from other things that could be, that people could consider science, or put on the same level. Things like astrology, for example, where this way of thinking is not inherent. That's more about like making. You work. I feel like you work the other way. You work from the result. But in science, you kind of do it the same way. With like you work backwards because you have the hypothesis first, but often like your end result tends to not resemble your hypothesis that much. With things like astrology. I mean, what would be another good example? Can't think of one right now. But that is the baseline of what we need to think about when we talk about science. And now to wrap this all up, why is this important? Because if you think that way, if you consider yourself a scientist, if you internalize this way of thinking, then certain directions, certain ways of talking in our current society should be alarming to you. Because the base idea about science is open-mindedness. That's how it works. If you don't have open-mindedness, if you start to adhere and just start to believe, idealizing a certain hypothesis, then you're turning the thing on its head. Right? Then you get to Galileo, who's telling you something you don't want to hear, and you're like, recant that or we'll burn you, because it doesn't like adhere with a worldview. And a good recent example for me, and this is very controversial, but I feel very strongly about this, is climate research. Because no matter where you fall on, does climate change exist? To what degree is it man-made? It doesn't really matter, what your opinion there is, or what you think is fact. What I'm talking about is you have a hypothesis. The hypothesis is climate change does exist. We have data that seems to confirm this hypothesis. So, we peer reviewed it. This is our working hypothesis. This is the scientific consensus, right? Science is inherently the thing we're thinking is current right now, is a fact right now, is a consensus. If somebody then goes and says, well, I don't think it's that way, this is my hypothesis, you don't have to listen to them, right? You don't need to get away from your consensus. But these days, you often have a reaction where you read it in the press all the time. 98% of scientists agree, blah. That sentence is the dumbest sentence I've ever heard. Any journalist who writes that, I could slap in the face immediately. If you write that, you just have shown that you do not understand everything I just talked about for an hour. It doesn't matter that everybody agrees, right? It doesn't matter. That's not the point. They could still all be wrong, or slightly wrong. Your whole I'm neutral to the hypothesis. I'm neutral to the results of the experiments. How does that confer with how many of my peers say that, right? When Watson and Crick came along and said, well, whoever really invented this, there's controversy about that as well. But when those guys came along and said, this is what the DNA looks like. And some journalist would have said, well, 98% of all scientists right now disagree that Watson and Crick are right. And then 50 years later, you figure out, well, but I think they were right. Those 98% don't matter. That's not how science works. I mean, that's how you establish the current consensus, yes. But that should never be used to shoot down somebody who says, actually, it's different. The way you shoot them down is you go, okay, so you think this current hypothesis isn't right. What's your hypothesis? What's your data? And then you have to evaluate the data. Mode 7 says, come over and get slapping fat. Why? Are you a journalist? Have you written this very sentence? Because, that is that's people are saying, I believe in science. I know who it was. Somebody famously said science doesn't need belief, right? The airplane stays in the sky if you believe it or not. Science is not a religion. But like, I feel that science is actually being turned into religion. But we're going to talk more about that in the upcoming episode where I talk about the problem with facts, because we're getting into that. But I hope I could explain a little bit how the scientific method works. I hope I did it justice. If you're a scientist or if you're not, if you disagree, please let me know. PrivateCitizens.press is where the show notes are. There's contact details on there. You can contact me anonymously if you want. Be a whistleblower. I just mean we need someone to come over to the US to help slap the journalists around a bit, says Mozart. God, that would be a job. I don't think I've been doing boxing training for a year now, but I don't think my hands are up to it. Oh God, no. Harry Vatana says the universe doesn't care about your feelings. Yeah, exactly. So why I'm saying that with the climate change thing is like, so I personally, I think, yes, it's been aptly shown that climate change is real. I'm less positive on that it's man-made. I think it's likely, but it's not like, I think there's a lot more work to be done there to actually prove that, which in politics doesn't really mean, I have always said that that is just not important. Like, with a question like that, I think we should assume it's man-made. That's the only logical thing to do. But like, to go from there to say, yeah, well, that's just, that chapter's closed, we should never prove that. That's just dumb. Like, there's like, oh God, I lost like a month of my life or more trying to figure out how the greenhouse effect works. If you want to fall into a rabbit hole, like, go to the Wikipedia article for greenhouse effect, which is horrible, so don't really read that. Look at the primary sources and read the primary sources and try to figure out, like, it's a model, and there's different models of it. And some of them I understand, some of them I don't, because I don't have enough knowledge in chemistry. But it's like fucking complicated. And it's not as clean cut as you'd think it is if you just read a newspaper. Because all of these journalists who are writing this, they didn't even do that like months of research that I did. Because believe me, it was painful. It's painful to like read a month about a thing and not being able to understand it. I mean, you thought you were a clever person. I kind of assumed that with like black holes, but I thought it'll be easier to explain the greenhouse effect. But where I'm trying to get to, I think it's just dangerous, and it hurts science as a whole, and it hurts the scientific process. If you're actively trying to dissuade people from from forming hypotheses that go contrary to yours, and it's actually not necessary. I think people are doing this because they're thinking, well, even if it's not like completely everything's clear, the thing I just said, where I said, it's prudent to act upon this as if it's real and it's man-made, yes. But going from there, saying it's actually dangerous if you let people, like, because they're conspiracy theorists. I mean, some of them might be conspiracy theorists, others might just be researchers. They might just be scientists. That's the way it works. But you go, this doesn't make sense. My hypothesis is that, and I'm going to try to prove it. The problem is, we're living in a climate. Oh God, I don't have the soundboard ready. We're living in a climate where you wouldn't get that. Like, even if you had that hypothesis and you had followed the scientific method as best as you can, you had like data, and the data is like, to all appearances, exactly proving what you're saying, you wouldn't even get that peer reviewed. Like, no paper would want to publish that. That would be like, or you'd get it published in something that nobody reads, right? And that is the thing that is happening, and I see that happening a lot. Like that in the last year with the stuff about SARS-CoV-2, there were like experts in the field, like in Germany, there's maybe like 4 virologists that are like that were actively researching SARS-like viruses, like coronaviruses, but it's more like SARS and MERS, right? Before this thing hit the press and blew up, right? And 2 of them were like basically outcasts to the point where they couldn't publish some papers because they were saying things that was like, oh no, we can't, like other people were saying we can't, for political reasons, we can't say this because then people think it's not real or whatever, like that they'll start thinking, for themselves, and it's not good, and then they won't follow the rules. And it's like, that's the most destructive thing to science you can have. That is like back in the Renaissance, the church going, no, you can't think that because like we have a religion and it goes like against that religion or something. If we go down that road, then we're fucked. Then the scientific method won't help us because it's not being followed, because that neutrality isn't there. Right? You're going to have that neutrality. No matter how nutcase the theory sounds. What do you think Einstein's theory sounded like to the people back in the day? Atoms? Like fucking general relativity? There's like this little thing and you can split it and then a Japanese city is just gone? Like, look at that guy. He's nuts. Look at this hair. Anyway, I'm gonna stop now. I'm getting ranty. Deep contemplation, then we're fucked. Yes. That's about it. Please, if you have feedback on this, let me know. And speaking of feedback, we actually have we have some. So let's talk about that. Obviously not on the scientific method. Centura Aperta says, yes, we are moving more and more towards fucked. Well, yes. It seems to be a cycle in history. You move towards fucked, then you move towards very fucked, then something blows up, and then it gets better for a bit. And I think we had a very good time for a long time, and it seems like we're moving towards rapidly towards being fucked a little bit. Hopefully not as fucked as we were 100 years ago. But we'll see. On the last show, I talked about hacker attacks. On the last 2 shows, I talked about hacker attacks. And I talked about Russians, because there's always the Russian hackers. And I was kind of asking, do I have any Russian listeners? What do they think? Like about us people in the West always going to press, yeah, them Russian hackers. Them, or like one of my new favorite sound bites from Escape from Tarkov goes, that's goddamn Ruskies hacking our servers. And the Russians just going, so I will stop pronouncing it now. I've got a professional to do it. It's for my Russian listeners. Anyway, so I asked, if you're a Russian listener, come on, chime in. Like, what's going on? What do you think? And I got some responses. There were people saying that they were basically. I'm very pissed off by this. Some people was like, I just think it's hilarious. But I think in general, there seems to be like the underlying thing. If I read between the lines, it seems to be like somebody actually said this very specifically, that basically there is no Russian viewpoint. They think, because Russia is very large. Well, I kind of knew that, and has a very diverse society, which also makes sense. And if anything, it seems like that politics in Russia, surprise, surprise, are basically as polarized as they are in the UK, in the US, and Germany, which also, if you think about it, is no surprise. But I just want to share that with everybody because I think that, that was an interesting thing. We don't, not living in the country, at least, I don't often think about it, that it's, the same way there as it's here. I have a feeling that there is no middle ground. You're either I don't know, a authoritarian scumbag supporting Putin, or you're not, or whatever. Like whatever the divide is there. Just like in the US, it's you're either a Democrat or a Republican. In Germany, you're either for curfews or you're a Nazi. Right? There's no middle ground, and that's probably the same way, which is sad, and further affirms that we are moving more and more towards fucked. We also had a very interesting discussion in Discord where Ari Vatana, who I think is probably Harry Vatana, who's just in Discord chat, in Twitch chat as well, said, I'm dying inside as I listen to the last 2 episodes. The university I work at in the IT support department is changing the students' email structure to Exchange. I mean, I talked about the Exchange hack and SolarWinds and stuff. Praising the functionalities of Office 365 and using Teams and Zoom as the main tools to give lectures. I think you're not alone there. I think this is happening all over the world. Also in schools, talking to teachers. It's a bit harder in Germany because our data protection agencies, privacy people, are now starting to say, well, it wasn't really, you couldn't really use Office 365 before because we have like the GDPR and rules and shit, and why are you allowed to now? Maybe you're not, which is probably a topic I'm going to do an episode on at some point. Centuria Perta says, you mean all the people in a country don't all think the same way? I'm neither Democrat or Republican. Yeah, I know, but try to get that point across on Twitter, right? On Facebook. Say something, and you're like, you go like, I'm like, I've read a lot about scientific materials about climate change, and I don't think it's as clear cut as the New York Times make it sound like. And next thing you know, you damn fucking Republican hillbilly Trump voter conspiracy theorist nut job, we'll have to ban you off the platform. Yeah, so but anyway, back to Office. Yeah, I feel your pain, Ari Vatana. It sounds like if you don't like Trump, for example, then you're lumped in with someone that loves Biden, says Mode 7. Exactly. I talked about this a long time with Mike on episode. Anyway, so yes. So Ari Vatana saying the university I work at, it's going to Office 365 and Teams, and I'm dying inside. So I listened to this. To which Soup replied, "The truth is, as end users, we like integrated experience, and no one else does a proper Office suite. And you're using PowerPoint and Word and Excel anyway. So only one way you can go for a competitive rate too." I actually completely disagree with that. I think especially Microsoft doesn't do a proper Office suite. I think a proper Office suite runs offline and doesn't go down, and I can't do any work if Microsoft service go down. And if you think that doesn't happen, just go on the register and like have a search for like Office 365 downtime, right? There's like days where like half a day like they couldn't work in the UK or whatever, and in Germany we had the same thing. Like that's not a proper Office suite. I actually I was paying for a Word, not complete Office. I was just paying for a Word license as a freelancer because I do. So the reality as a freelance journalist is like you work for anybody, right? Yeah, I'm a mercenary basically. I work for anybody I can, and I can't choose like what file formats they want, and a lot of like. Believe me, I'm rolling my eyes right now if you listen to the podcast, but like a lot of publishing companies, they use Word. I have no idea why. I'm submitting an article that goes on a website, like why am I using Word? But they use Word, right? So I was actually paying for a while for an Office, for a Word license, not Office 365 that I don't, right? I need to work when I don't have the internet as well. And also, privacy reasons and all that. But And I actually, when I reinstalled my computer recently, I reinstalled everything, and I was like, I should try LibreOffice again. And now, when I bought the license, like, I didn't know. I was like starting as a freelancer. I'd never done this before. I didn't know what to expect. I knew LibreOffice and I knew Word, but I knew there was very specific things I might actually need Word for, and I didn't know what to expect. Now, with like 2 years of experience, I was like, okay, I can reevaluate. This is gonna install LibreOffice, and I'm not paying for a Word license anymore because, I mean, surprise, surprise, LibreOffice is actually better. I mean, I knew it was better for me, from the user experience, but like, it's also like, I've been using it now for the stuff I do with external people, and you can't notice. Yeah, and I know, I've having done Linux Outlaws for a long time. People have been saying for a long time you can just use LibreOffice, which isn't completely true. It's kind of like, oh, you could do audio production on Linux. Yeah, all the people saying this are not doing a weekly Linux podcast. At the moment where I tried to do this, hell. There was kind of the same thing with Office, but I think it's changed over the years. And so I think actually there's somebody who does a proper Office suite, and called LibreOffice. And it is actually better. And I'm not using PowerPoint, and I'm not using Excel. Okay, I'm a special case, but I'll shoot myself. Like, fuck. No. Especially those, like Excel. Like, people do things in spreadsheets that spreadsheets were never meant. Like, so much, like, some things are so much easier if you don't do them in a spreadsheet. Anyway, let's not get into that right on PowerPoint. Let's not even get started. Like, if I give a presentation, it's HTML5. I don't have the problem that it doesn't run. Like, even if my computer doesn't work, it's just on a USB stick. I just need a browser. It's just so much better. Only one way you can go for competitive RAID 2. Well, I don't know. If you want the thing I want, then LibreOffice is free. It's free for companies as well. It's not like that's a much more competitive rate. If you do want a cloud Office suite, maybe. Although I don't know. Doesn't Oracle, like, there are other, like, I'm not so sure about that. I just think cloud Office suites are like a nightmare. And they're obviously a security nightmare, which we've just seen. SolarWinds and the Exchange. I mean, Fab, you've just challenged me to want to do a podcast using all GNU/Linux, especially, says Mose. Dude, you can do that, but I've been there, I've done that, I've got the t-shirt. That is what Linux Outlaws was. I mean, I think, yeah, there were times when it wasn't completely, but like for the beginning and for a large part of its run, it was completely produced with open source software. And we even did live streaming at a point where nobody, like, video live streaming, at a point where very few people, that was like before OBS. We were using like Hangouts and shit. Okay, it's debatable, they free software, let's not get down that rabbit hole. But, I've done that, and there was a lot of pain. It's probably a lot easier now. Especially if you have OBS. I mean, OBS great on Linux. But, oh my God. Anyway, so that was the feedback for this episode. I'm hoping I'll get a lot of feedback about this one, about the scientific method. And if you're listening to this, if you're a scientist, and if you think, hey, I can actually enlighten Fab about this, or I have some, I can actually talk about how I do it every day, please get in contact. I'm also very open to having guests on. The only thing you need is the ability to speak English that other people can understand, and somewhat of a microphone. But I can work with, speaking of, 12, 13 years, almost 14 years of podcasting experience now. I can make it work probably. So I would, that would be amazing. So do that. Go to privatecitizen.press and click on the contact link and get in contact, and tell me what you think. And with that, we come to the part of the show where I thank everybody who did that, because you just became producers. You wrote in, you gave me an idea for the show, maybe you gave me content. I appreciate it very much. And there are other ways, of course, of helping me out, because in the end of the day, I'm just a poor, relatively poor, well, you know, we're all privileged in our own ways. There are much poorer people than me. But, you know, a relatively poor freelance journalist who actually lives off his researcher's wife's salary sometimes, which is also not copious. But, you know, don't have kids, so it kind of works. If you want to help, you can. I have a Patreon, which is, you know, a website you can subscribe, and then you can just support me monthly. Starts at like $1. I think you can put in an amount plus taxes, of course. Gotta pay the man. You can do that, but you can also, like, if you prefer one-off donations, you can use PayPal. Producers@fab.industries is the email address for that. All of these details are in the show notes, privatecitizen.press. Just very quickly, it's the value for value model, which means obviously you get this for free, and, you know, if you derive some value, you know, think about giving it back. If you don't feel bad. I don't want anybody to feel bad. I just keep reiterating this because, you know, might be a new listener there. And of course, I need to thank everybody who did that, who you know, chipped in and sent me some money. So, without further ado, the people who supported me on Patreon and PayPal are Georges Butterbeans, Michael Mullen Jensen, Jonathan M. Hathy, Niall Donegan, Dave, Steve Foes, Shelby Groover, Vlad, Jackie Plage, 1I11G. I'm thinking there must be a different way to pronounce this, but I haven't come up with. Looks a bit like lead speak. If I pronounce anything wrong on here, please also write me. Anyway, 1I11G, Philipp Klostermann, Jaroslav Lichtblau, Kai Sears, IKN, Michael Small, Fadi Mansour, Dirk Didi, Bennett Piata, Joe Poser, Matt Jellyman, David Potter, Larry Glock, Mika, Martin, Dave Umrish, Tobias, Mr. Amish, Ricky M, Drive Zero, Mode 7, Avis, Jonathan Edwards, Barry Williams, Sandman616, Neil, Captain Egghead, Rizal, D, and Iwan Curry. Thanks to all of you. And I would also like to thank my Twitch subscribers. I stream this live on Twitch every week. I stream a lot of other things, like 12 hours of Disco Elysium the other day. If you enjoy this content, you can subscribe on Twitch. If you have Amazon Prime, you can do so for free. You can sign up on Twitch and just, you know, link your accounts. You have to renew it every month, but you are like kicking me some money and it doesn't cost you anything. And some people will subscribe and actually support the channel on Twitch, which is great. So thanks to my Twitch subscribers, which are Mike the Dane, Galtaran, Mode 7 is underscore unavailable. That is mode with 0 and 7 like O. 0 instead of an O. Look in the show notes. It's complicated. Halifa, it's a great streamer. L underscore terrestrius underscore Jim, and Flash underscore Gordo. Thanks to all of you. I appreciate it very much. And I also like to thank Bytemark, bytemark.co.uk, who are graciously for years have provided me the service I use to send you the audio files, which is very important. Very, very important. Are you still doing the 30x3 shirt thing? I just went to the $30 club. You did Centuria purchase. That is incredibly gracious. Yes. So it's, oh God, was it 3 months? I think it is. Like there's a basically I think it's 3 months for the $30, and then it's like an automatic Patreon thing. So they should then contact you and send you a shirt. So the fulfillment is directly, like it's a merch thing from Patreon. I think once you get over that, it's obviously printed on demand. They will print that shirt and send it to you. I think Georges is the only other member of that club so far. And I obviously have a shirt because I wanted one before I start all this to test it out. And it's a very nice shirt. I like it very much. So very cool. got to figure out that free Prime subscriber thing. Yes, that is. I don't know how easy it is. It's kind of like you're obviously on Twitch and you're posting. So somewhere in your settings, there's like a link to Amazon Prime, and then you have to obviously authenticate with your Amazon account that has Prime. And then you have one free, like every month you can subscribe to one channel, and you have like the when you click on subscribe, you can the usual thing where you pay, and it also says like use my Prime subscription. So I do that every month. I usually pick like this, like I have some streamers I'm subscribed to on a repeating basis, and then I do it now that like I watch them obviously a lot, and then any other streamer I watched a lot this month, I usually subscribe to them, to kick them a little bit of money. And I think Centuria Apertus has just figured it out because he's just subscribed. So thanks for that. Anyway, let's wrap this up because like the podcast listeners are like, what, Twitch? What is this? What is this? What is this newfangled internet? So basically, I'm streaming this on Twitch, obviously, with a face cam. And also, I share my screen, so you can actually see how the podcast is made and what software I use and all that. Right. Anyway, let's wrap this up. Let's get out of here. Obviously, other credits. The show's theme song is called "Acoustic Roots" by a musician called Raoul Kabazali. And then we also have a show ending song. I do this now. And for this show, it's a song called Control Alt Delete. So just as this spelled as like the 3 keys by Milva. So I'm going to wrap this up. I'll see you, or you'll hear from me on Friday when I'll release basically the second part of these 2 sister episodes, so to speak. Until then, Let's revive an old one. Stay free, stay open source, aim to misbehave, and remember, I'm always there defending your right to have something to hide. See you soon.
The streets are crying, ocean turns into fighting. Take it to the streets, hit control, delete. Take it to the streets. Control, delete. Warning's been spread wide. You can't do none to stop it. Posing is bound to fight, but you're only causing riots. Words move from mouth to mouth. Justice is also troubling, all the way from north to south. It's been a long time coming. Take it to the streets, hit control, delete. Take it to the streets, hit control, delete.
right. Sorry about that music being not playing. For some reason, sound effects weren't playing either, I think. Well, not the subscribe. Those were off, but I had something misconfigured. Centuria Pertus, you have redeemed the... usually I should put on a hat for this thing, but I think because I'm wearing one, you can now choose an alternative hat. And before you said you like this hat, so this is it was actually a fedora. I restyled it. It's like a handmade beaver pelt hat. It's very fine from a guy in Berlin, a company called a Scheschinger hat. It's a lovely hat. What? That was someone else? Oh, that was Galtaran. I'm sorry, Galtaran. Yeah, I was confused there. So Galtaran. Now that I've told you about this hat, you can choose another hat. So I've got another fedora that I've styled into a cowboy hat style. I styled them all like I like this style. I've settled on this style. It's got some for decoration. Got some what are they called? Matches. Oh, this has a raven feather for decoration, and a pheasant feather, and also from the Expanse, Alex's like hat pin. If you can see that, right? But I mean, I could also wear this, which is an Australian Akubra. That's did I put this the wrong way around now? I could wear this. Like this is a proper cowboy hat. So I don't know. Could wear that. I could wear this hat. Whatever you prefer. I mean, I've got some alternatives. Give me a second. Got a lot of hats here. I could go like Captain, right? Could do that. Go all peaky fucking blinders on you. So I don't know. Or if you like the feathers, I also have this Akubra, which has like basically a ton of feathers. It's like a chicken feathers. It's like that's the chicken. There's like a seabird. So kind of crap. Wait, where are my headphones? Oh, they're under the hat. One of the hats. Sorry, I have to say it, but do you have any ass hats? No, I don't have any ass hats. I don't think so. I think the Aussie hat looks better than the American cowboy hat. Well, I don't actually have an American cowboy hat. They're both Aussie hats. Now, they're not styled like... They're both Akubras. They're both styled in a very American way, like this. I like this crease, basically. It's the Cattleman crease. I'm a big Steve McQueen fan, but I'm going to stick with this, unless Galtaran objects. Gotta go with this. I'm gonna assume you meant this one. Wait, I need to put this one back. I mean, I'm using these headphones, so I might as well start wearing a proper hat here. Oh, what size hat do I wear? 61. I have a humongous head, as my mother always used to say, or always says. Well, used to say, she's alive, obviously. So like, it was hell giving birth to you. That's not what my mother sounds like, but I didn't mean you had an American hat. I'm sorry. Aussie hat. Aussie ones look cooler. Yeah, well, it used to be styled like an Aussie hat. You can still see like from the crease here. But I don't know. I like this. I like the style at the moment. I mean, they're felt hats, right? That's what I love about a good, like high quality felt hat. You can just restyle them with a bit of steam. Anyway, please, normally I would end the show now and finish this podcast. But obviously we're doing a second episode, which means I won't get this episode out on this day, but I'm just gonna fudge it. We'll just pretend. I mean, it's by the time I release it, it'll still be Wednesday somewhere in America, I guess. So I'm just gonna save this, and I'm gonna use this file later, obviously, to finish that episode. So no, don't make a mistake here. And then we're gonna save this as episode 64. It's gonna be the next one, right? But before I do that, and before I get that all set up, I'm gonna have a quick break, refresh myself a little bit, and maybe get a beer, and then I'll be back in about like 5 minutes, and we'll keep on podcasting. We're gonna talk about. I'm gonna basically follow on directly with a bit more rants about science and the press and politicians and how they don't understand science. So that's gonna be episode 64, which is the problem with facts. So please hang in there. I'll be back very shortly. Or I should put some music on. Now that it works, right? What do we want? No, let's just. We can just go with that. Let's just go with something. Let's have something. And I'll be back very shortly. Please don't go anywhere.